Hello, welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. First, the headlines. Israel, angry over Russia's claim Hitler was Jewish, demands an apology. One teenager dead, one wounded as missile hits Odessa. And the EU says ruble payments would breach sanctions. Welcome again to the program. We begin with another spat brewing between Israel and Russia over claims that German dictator Adolf Hitler was Jewish. Israel is infuriated by the comment made by Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who claimed that the Nazi leader had Jewish blood. He made the comment to justify Russia's portrayal of Ukraine as Nazi, despite the fact that its president is Jewish. That is the Ukrainian president. The Israeli Foreign Ministry summoned Russia's ambassador to Ukraine for clarification and has demanded an apology. The comments have been condemned across the political spectrum in Israel and by newspapers in the country. One newspaper said it meant that Israel could no longer be neutral on the war in Ukraine, and that Jerusalem's best laid plans to somehow stay above the war have now been undone. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's suggestion that Nazi leader Adolf Hitler had Jewish origins show that Moscow has forgotten or never learned the lessons of World War II. In his regular online video message, President Zelensky said, "I have no words." Mr. Lavrov's comments was made in an interview with Italian television on Sunday when he was asked why Russia said it needed to denazify Ukraine if the country's own president, Volodymyr Zelensky, was himself Jewish. In his address to the Ukrainian nation, President Zelensky said efforts to evacuate civilians from the city of Mariupol's Azovstal steel plant continues.
Вчора, наприклад, міністр закордонних справ Російської Федерації відкрито і не соромлячись.
Russia's foreign minister openly without hesitation said that the biggest anti-Semite were allegedly among the Jewish themselves, and that Hitler allegedly had Jewish blood. How could this be said on the eve of the anniversary of the victory over Nazism? These words mean that Russia's top diplomat is blaming the Jewish people for Nazi crime. After the Russian missile attack at Babin Yar in Kiev, after the menorah damaged by the shelling at the site of the mass execution in Dobritsky Yar near Kharkiv, after the death of ordinary people who survived the Nazi occupation and Nazi concentration camps from Russia shelling, such as an anti-Semitic thrust by their minister, means Russia has forgotten all the lessons of the World War II. Or maybe they were never taught these lessons.
To those evacuations now from the Ukrainian besieged city of Mariupol, we're learning more than 200 civilians are still holed up in the Azovstal steel works. A number of civilians were evacuated from there on Sunday with the help of the UN and the Red Cross. Authorities say there are about 10,000 civilians remaining in the city itself. The UN and the Red Cross are still hoping to evacuate more civilians from Mariupol. Meanwhile, the fighting has not stopped in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky says a 14-year-old boy was killed and a 17-year-old girl was wounded in a missile strike in the southern port of Odessa. A video uploaded to social media showed firefighters spraying water onto a fire in a residential building. The caption alongside the video read, "Rescuers eliminate the consequence of a missile strike in Odessa." According to President Zelensky, the missile hit a dormitory. In a video message, he asked how the children and the dormitory threatened the Russian state. Earlier, the Secretary of Ukraine's Security Council, Oleksiy Danilov, was quoted by media as saying the strike also hit a church, blowing the roof off. We've been staying with U.S. support for Ukraine in this war and that $33 billion in emergency aid that President Joe Biden wants Congress to pass as soon as possible. On Monday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she hoped the bill would be moved quickly. She and other lawmakers who had made a trip to Kiev to visit President Volodymyr Zelensky said they hoped aid would be moved as quickly as next week. President Joe Biden last Thursday asked Congress for the money to support the government in Kiev, a dramatic escalation of the U.S. funding for Ukraine more than 2 months after it was invaded by Russia.
This is committee week.
Is the goal then to have a bill ready when you guys are back, the House is back in session in 2 weeks?
Working as hard as we can to get the bill done.
That would be our hope.
Yeah, quickly, very quickly.
They're writing it now, right?
Yeah, as we speak.
Right. And they're writing it now, and we would hope that it would be taken up next week. Yeah, but the sooner the better. But we are back next week. This week. We're in perfect timing. This is committee week where we have hearings and write bills and that, so that when we come back we have product and quality product, and the committee is at work, and the sooner the better.
There will be more financial aid for Ukraine, this time from the UK, where Prime Minister Boris Johnson is expected to address Parliament today. He is expected to announce a £300 million package in extra military support, which will include electronic warfare equipment, a counter-battery radar system, GPS jammers and night vision devices. Mr. Johnson, who will be addressing Parliament, will be describing Ukraine's resistance to the Russian invasion as the country's finest hour. It's also said to say that the UK Parliament met throughout the Second World War, just as Ukraine's Verkhovna radar has done through the war with Russia. And the British people showed such unity and resolve that, quote, "we remember our time of greatest peril as our finest hour." The EU's Energy Policy Commissioner Kadri Simpson says using Moscow's proposed scheme for foreign companies to pay for gas by enabling Russia to convert their payments into rubles would breach European Union sanctions. The Estonian member of the EU executive added that there was no immediate risk for Europe's security of supply after Russia cut gas supply to Bulgaria and Poland last week for refusing to comply with its payment scheme. Moscow has said foreign gas buyers must deposit euros or dollars into an account at privately owned Russian bank, Gazprom Bank, which would convert them into rubles. French Environment Minister Barbara Pompili, whose country currently chairs the Council of European Union, said a regional task force would be set up to deal with the energy situation in the two former Warsaw Pact members.
Paying in rubles through the conversion mechanism managed by the Russian public authorities and a second dedicated account in Gazprom Bank is a violation of the sanctions and cannot be accepted. The member states and the companies should not have any illusions that they can rely on the good faith of Gazprom and the Russian regime in this matter. At this stage, this is no immediate risk for Europe's security of supply. For now, deliveries to Poland and Bulgaria continue via alternative routes from Greece and Germany.
Joining me now, to beg your pardon, before that, we have been talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the stories making the headlines today. The Ukrainian president commenting on Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov's comments about the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler being Jewish. It was supposed to be a comment to suggest that this was the reason why Russia was in Ukraine, to denazify the country. But back to the energy summit in the European Union, where leaders have been quite in disagreement about, the payment of Russian gas in ruble. I have joining me now Orisha Jemi Obomine, who's the head of research at Augusto & Co. He is joining me virtually. Thank you for joining me on the program this morning. A pleasure having you.
Morning. How are you?
I'm good. And you? Enjoying the holiday?
Yes, I am.
That's if you have the time to. So let's talk, business now. And, this issue with the Russia gas is quite important, isn't it? It was the only thing that was left out, of all the sanctions imposed on Russia, of all, the agreements, to push Russia into a box. This was the only area that was not touched. So why is it even becoming even more sensitive now, especially for other European countries, knowing that Russia could really have threatened them, with cutting off gas supply to their countries because of the sanctions imposed?
Okay, so now remember that the sanctions were supposed to be economic sanctions, which means that the aim of the sanctions really were to cripple Russia's economy, cripple Russia at the heart of its economy. And what's the heart of Russia's economy? Gas, basically, oil and gas. Okay? But when Russia talks oil and gas, it talks about it not in the way Nigeria talks about it. It's one of the top 5 exporters of oil and also one of the top 5 exporters of gas. Okay? So when you talk about oil and gas in a compounded manner, then you basically mean Russia. So, and it has built pipelines across European states, interestingly, some through Ukraine to Western Europe and then Eastern Europe. And if you follow the trajectory of the sanctions, you'd notice that the sanctions were aimed at Russia's economy. For instance, they tried to shut Russia out of the international financial system. They tried to shut Russia out of the international financial system through SWIFT, for instance, keeping Russia out of SWIFT. The US had said that it would stop importing Russia's oil. Well, one of the reasons why the US could say so is that the US gets less than 3% of its oil demands from Russia. And remember that the US is also a major producer of oil. But in the case of Western Europe, this was slightly different, over 40% of gas requirements coming from Russia. So if Western Europe had alternative sources of gas that could have been switched on day one of the sanctions, on the same day that the SWIFT sanctions were announced, on the same day that the dollar reserves of the Russian central bank were frozen, if Europe could guarantee alternative supplies of gas, they would have also switched off on Russian gas. So it was all about economic survival. And that's why in the initial days of the war, Russia kept supplying gas, Europe kept buying gas. So for both parties, they realized that we could keep fighting the war, the Georgia, but let's keep it outside of this gas, because Russia needs the money, Europe needs the gas. It's about energy security, because all of these alternative fuel options aren't mature enough to fill in that gap that Russian gas would fill in. So that was a preliminary why gas was left out at the beginning of the sanction rule books. Okay? So what's different today? Simple. What's different today is that Europe's conscience is being pricked. And it's now becoming a logical question to ask that you basically funding this war, because by keeping the gas pipes open with Russia, by buying Russian gas, you're basically funding this war. So on the other end, we're seeing the devastation of the war. Europe has not seen anything like this since the Second World War, and is raising ethical and moral questions. How do you keep sanctioning Russia as an aggressor? How do you keep funding Ukraine in arms and equipment and all of that, and you buying Russian gas? So it's that ethical, moral dilemma that has pushed Europe to this point. Now, on the other end as well, the US had long cut off Russian oil. The US had long announced at the beginning of its own sanction grid against Russia that we will no longer buy Russian oil, and had subtly been applying pressure on Europe to do the same. But Europe couldn't do the same because they were looking for alternative sources. Okay? So it's an economic question as much as a moral dilemma for Europe.
Yeah,
If I may add one more thing. If I may add one more thing. Now, remember, Russia had also been trying to flex its currency muscles and saying things like, since you've shut out the Russian central bank basically from its own reserves and it can no longer access its own reserves. Now, what you need to do is that you need to buy Russian gas today in ruble. So that was really pushing Europe to some form of wall. And when you have your back to the wall, then it's easier to fight back.
Yeah, couldn't agree with you more. The issue of morality, indeed. And I do remember, when North Korea started developing nuclear weapons, there were sanctions imposed on the country, but there were certain areas that were not touched. For example, food supply and all of that to North Korea, because if they had stopped all of that, then the people of North Korea would have died. But once again, you have been researching on this. So how long, how long before, these European countries begin to feel the crunch, begin to feel the absence of Russian gas? Because right now they're still contemplating whether or not to pay in rubles. They're still insistent that this is a breach of contract. So how long before, they begin to realize there is no other way out of this?
Now we have to look at this in a multi-scenario manner. What has led to all of these conversations is the war, okay? Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So that's the underlying issue here, really. So there are two ways of looking at this. One, you could chase the war itself. I'm not sure it would be wise for statesmen to abort the option of diplomacy, because what's the good old mantra about wars, that all wars end on a negotiation table. So that's still an option we mustn't take away. It's looking like a less remote option, a less remote in terms of probability of occurrence. It's looking like a less remote scenario today, but it's still possible and not impossible. So the first thing is this. It's looking like a war that will be long drawn. We hope it's not, for the sake of humanity, but it's looking like a war that will be long drawn. But this, I think, should create an incentive for peace efforts, for peace efforts in terms of statesmen coming together to say enough is enough. That's one. Now, on the second end, in terms of the ruble versus the dollar here, Russia is basically saying, you shut me out of the dollar system, right? And as long as I'm out of the dollar system, why are you paying me in dollars? Pay me in my currency, the rubles. Now, for Europe, it's a case of, if you pay in the ruble, then it just shows some form of desperation and then a moral paradox, in the sense that you've sanctioned Russia across many fronts, but you're going as far as buying gas in ruble. You've sanctioned Russia and crippled its dollar economy, but you're going as far as buying gas in ruble. But remember that what can bail Europe out today, and what can basically make Europe say to Russia that keep your gas, keep your ruble, keep all you've got, is alternative supplies. Okay? Is alternative supplies. Now, unlike oil, gas is a bit more, how do I put it now? Gas, it's not easily to just increase supplies because they are long-term contracts, okay? And if I may bring the narrative home a bit, this is where countries like Nigeria can now benefit. But like I said, these aren't short-term, these are long-term. Overall, on the long term, what Europe is thinking about today, the major thought on the mind of Europe is, how do we diversify our gas supplies away from Russia? So what Europe is basically doing today is looking at the world map and saying, where are the alternative supplies of gas across the world? The Qataris, the Nigerians, and then the countries like Mozambique, where the Total project that was shut down due to insecurity becomes more important at this stage. Nigeria, for instance, the Train 7, which isn't due to come up for the next 2 or 3 years, the LNG Train 7, and even LNG Train 8, because remember that for a country like Nigeria, we weren't supposed to be talking of a Train 7 at this point. We should have probably reached even a Train 9 at this point. So bringing it home a bit, this is where we become once again very important in the energy markets to the Western countries. So we would see renewed interest in our gas, right? And it's another bailout for us as a country, especially thinking on the long term. So what this does is that at least it puts us on the world map in that energy conversation over the medium to long term. So the world is interested in how well we manage our LNG projects, especially an LNG Train 7, but more importantly, how well we can expand supplies. Because even after the war, Europe would no longer see Russia as a dependable ally, especially as Putin remains in power. So even when diplomatic efforts can yield the desired results, which is to end the war, okay? As long as Putin and that entire system he represents, as if Putin or anyone from that system he represents remains in power, Europe remains energy insecure and will continue to look for alternatives. And that's where countries like Nigeria and countries like Mozambique that are gas rich and have projects in the pipeline become increasingly important. So we must begin to talk about the Trans-Sahara pipelines and every other alternative that help us take supply across the world.
Orishejimi, thank you so much for speaking with us this morning. I couldn't thank you enough, for this analysis you've given on the oil situation in Europe and where Nigeria and other countries can come in. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much. Have a blessed day.
You too. Now, coming up after the break on the program, Germany is to back EU oil embargo on Russia. We'll have more on this up ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Staying with business news, while many African countries and Middle Eastern importers struggle under the weight of food insecurity as a consequence of the war in Ukraine, leaders of Gulf Arab countries, where less than 2% of land is cultivated and 85% of food is imported, seem to have met this food crisis well prepared. A secret, according to analysts, lies in their decades-long strategy for food security and resources to implement it. Our business correspondent, John Mekwa, is here with the details. And with the secrets. Oh, yeah, with the secrets, which you're about to tell us. Okay, so what is it?
That was very direct. I wasn't expecting that. Well, first of all, I think it's important to help our viewers appreciate. A lot of people obviously know that when you talk about the Gulf of Arab states, you're talking of Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, and these are desert countries, so they don't have the fertile soil that we have. Planting there, farming there, it's a huge problem. So obviously they had to think of a way. So before 2008, they used to do a lot of imports, as you read there, about 80% of their food was imported. But at 2008, it got to the peak of it, and they were dealing with inflation, especially imported inflation, because they had to pay with dollars, for all of those. So whatever is happening in the Western world was imported into their own country, and that was a huge problem for them. So they had to think of a way to deal with this, and one way that they have done that is hydroponics. Now, hydroponics is planting in water, if you would say, like you can see there. you don't need soil for it. So they have nutrient-rich water, which they create, and then they plant into it, and that's how they make their food. So this reduce every year. They have, I think, United Arab Emirates, they have the target of reducing wheat importation by about 2.5% every year. And that's what they started doing in 2008 when they adopted this. And so, of course, that has greatly reduced their import bill. If not, we know the Arab Springs, that came because of, food crisis. We know in Egypt, they have subsidy, Libya, when you talk of bread. If not, at this time, this oil-rich country, of course, they would have been in a very tight corner. But they thought of this early, and they've been practicing. In fact, they have a roadmap. They have a ministry for food security that focuses on this. Now, that's not enough. They have something else that they do. It's called imported agriculture. So they go to poorer countries, and they buy land there and pay for employment. And so they cultivate crops just for them. This is being criticized that, it's depriving the poor farmers in that country, for instance, in Kenya, and some other countries, is depriving the farmers there of the land, because obviously they have the oil money, so they can pay high for it, and, they can afford to, get a lot of products from it. So it's being criticized, but I mean, this is what is working for this Gulf of Arab countries.
Yeah, I think some Asian countries are also doing the same thing too, buying up land in some African nations and then, cultivating crops there. But again, it just seemed like, they had foreseen what was going to happen.
Yeah, because they experienced it in 2008 when there was a crash, and then there was inflation, and it's really, really impacted them. So they had the money, and a lot of countries, like what countries are doing now, the food protectionism, a lot of countries do not, like when Indonesia just started, they've stopped exporting palm oil. So a lot of countries are protecting their economies. They are not exporting their products. So even when you have your money, the countries do not want to sell for you. So what can you do with the money?
So I know that over the last few years, Nigeria has had this agricultural drive. And you would think that, with what's been going on now, we really shouldn't be feeling as much impact of the invasion as we currently are. But here we are talking about an upcoming food crisis, a food crisis looming on the horizon. What are the lessons we should be learning from this?
Well, I guess the lesson that Nigeria should learn here is being intentional. Why? We do not need hydroponics system, in our farming. We have the land. We have fertile soil. All we need to do is to be intentional. If Nigeria, for instance, says Benue has a good soil for yam, let's focus on Benue for 6 months, give them all the mechanized instruments or equipment that they need, and then we have a lot of yam, and then we process it. Because one of our problems is we do have cocoa, we do have our grains, but even when we export it in raw form, and that way it doesn't add a lot of value. We don't get a lot of foreign exchange for it. So I believe if Nigeria is intentional, even if we use the system of comparative advantage, this state is good with this and this state is good with this.
But shouldn't we be good, with what we have produced? I mean, we have had a very serious agricultural drive. We've been producing rice. We've seen the pyramids. We have been producing yams. We've been exporting and all of that. Shouldn't we really just be good? Without these imports?
We should be good, but what we produce is not enough for us. We have the rice. We see the pyramids. Where are they? How many homes have they landed? How do you get them across? We're talking of fertilizer, one of our business shows. When we celebrated Dangote, farmers still find it difficult to access fertilizer. When they even get it in the market, it is very expensive. But we do have Dangote, and we did celebrate Dangote here on Channels Television, and we celebrated as a company that is going to make a change for Nigeria. So why are farmers still having problems getting fertilizer?
I'm asking you the questions, Ine. I don't know why you're asking me.
So there's the chain. Do you understand? There's the chain that goes from the production. You have a lot of middlemen. You have a lot of distortion. We talked about supply disruption. I know you've been hearing a whole lot about. We have it in Nigeria too. So we have it in the chain to move that fertilizer from Dangote, for instance, to the people who really need it, not the people who just want to make money out of it, the middlemen, you know, that are there distorting that. So if the government is intentional, and that's why I said, if Nigeria is intentional, we have all the resources. We have the human resources. We have the natural, we have the soil, we have the weather. If, for instance, the government says we want to focus on ensuring that farmers get fertilizer, because the war has also disrupted fertilizer production,
right, it has,
you know.
it has.
So if Nigeria, as a government, you know, they say we're going to focus on this, Dangote, how many bags of fertilizer can you afford to sell to Nigerian farmers? We buy it up. We have a store in every state. And then we tell farmers, this is the price of a bag of fertilizer. So if you come every Monday, you get a bag of fertilizer for 500 naira. You understand? So the farmers know exactly where to go to get it. Dangote knows exactly where to sell it to. There's no disruption in the supply. Tell me why the farmers will not get fertilizer.
Well, we don't know why they wouldn't get fertilizer. They should get fertilizer. Amy, thank you so much for laying this out for us. We'll look forward to your show.
Sure.
Coming up in a few minutes. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
And once again, just a recap of what's been going on today. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accusing, demanding an apology from Russia about his comments over the Nazi leader Adolf Hitler being Jewish. Well, Israel itself is upset, majorly upset about this, because Russia says this is a reason why they want to denazify Ukraine, the reason for the invasion or the special military operation in Ukraine. Also, evacuations from Mariupol are still continuing. Those who have been evacuated, beg your pardon, are making their way to Zaporizhia and other cities, some making their way across the border into Russia. Russia says it wants to help out, but there are still at least 100,000 people, civilians that is, still in Mariupol. 200 civilians still in the Azovstal Steelworks plant. UN and the Red Cross, which had helped with evacuations from Sunday, still eager to help more people get out of the country, out of the steel plant as well as Mariupol. Moving forward now, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says the country's upcoming Victory Day celebrations on May 9th will have no bearing on the pace of its special military operation in Ukraine. The pace of the operation in Ukraine depends, first of all, on the need to mitigate risks for civilians and Russian troops. Meanwhile, several military facilities of Ukraine were hit by high-precision missiles of the Russian aerospace forces during the latest development of its military operation, including 4 areas of concentration of forces and military equipment, as well as 3 warehouses of missiles and artillery weapons and ammunition in the areas of the settlements of Berezovo in Donetsk, Slatino and Barvenkovo in Kharkov region. That's according to a spokesperson for the Russian Defense Ministry. The spokesperson also notes that the Russian armed forces destroyed a hangar with weapons and ammunition delivered from the United States and European countries to the Odessa region using high-precision missiles, as well as a military airfield runway. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the Russian troops are continuing military actions in Kharkov and in Donbass, and the forces are building up at the southern part of the country, preparing to attack Dnipro near Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia. Civilian evacuation from the Azovstal steel plant, as we said, began on Sunday. 80 civilians have been evacuated from the site. That's the steel plant. The safe evacuation is as a result of ceasefire and opening of a humanitarian corridor, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Interior Ministry. Beg your pardon. The ministry also says civilians who wish to leave were delivered to representatives of the UN and International Committee of the Red Cross. On Sunday, President Zelensky said an evacuation had begun, confirming what was going on, of course, and that the evacuees were set to arrive at the city of Zaporizhzhia on Monday. I want to bring in Dr. Ndu Nwokolo. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Next Year SBD. He's currently in Abuja. Dr. Nwokolo, thank you for joining me on the program this morning. And I know that you've been hearing, about this Russian military missile attacks on a military arsenal in Odessa, and how, they're destroying weapons that were donated by countries like the US and other Western countries, for Ukraine to help the forces fight against the Russian troops which have invaded the country. How much of an impact do you think that this will have on the war, especially on the Ukrainian side?
Thank you for having me, Amarachi. First, I think this will extend the war, and there's a likelihood the West will want to up the arsenal by bringing more resources. If you look at this war, initially we thought it was going to be a kind of an asymmetrical conflict where Russia will walk in and walk out, but it's not playing that way. Ukraine has resisted them and will continue to resist them with the approval of more arms coming from the United Kingdom. And what we see, America asking the Congress to approve more budget, Germany donating more arms. We're in for a long day. So it's not as what Russia thought it would be. But the entire thing is, how will this continue to affect the global politics? How will this continue to affect global development in terms of food and other forms of human development? So Russia will continue to pound in more arms, more attack on Ukraine. And with the arms coming in from the West, Ukraine will continue to resist it. So it has really moved from an asymmetrical war that we thought it could be to what we see to be a situation where Ukraine is living up to what an expectation Russia didn't expect. Now, what we're seeing is that we're looking at a situation where you have a proxy war from the West helping Ukraine to resist Russia. So it will continue to go that way for a time until negotiation and other forms of other issues begin to play out that people need to take to the tables. For now, this is what we're seeing.
What would be fair in this war? And I ask this question because, Russia has threatened these countries that are supplying Ukraine with weapons, saying they will also get a taste of what's been going on in Ukraine. We've heard rumors of the Russian government planning to send missiles all the way to the UK. And, Russia also threatening other neighbors around Ukraine for their support as well. But here you are also, on the side of, these Western countries also still supplying weapons, still making this huge military fundings available to the Ukrainian government to help, to purchase weapons, to support the government in some way or the other, to fight this war. What would be fair ground for this, what would be a fair ground in this war when you look at it?
In war, propaganda is the game. So misinformation and disinformation is allowed. You are allowed to even say what you cannot even do, but what you can even imagine. So Russia knows the capability of some of the countries that it may not dare to attack. Now remember, it's almost like NATO through a proxy means fighting Russia. So Russia knows that it might not go that route. It might still want to just to pump up the volume and try to show that they have the capability to defend themselves and attack. Now, it's equally important for us to understand that why I said misinformation and disinformation is allowed, that propaganda is game. Incidentally, like what happened yesterday or day before yesterday with the Russian foreign minister talking about the Holocaust and the issue of Hitler having a Nazi's blood. Israel had wanted to be neutral in the game, but they've finally drawn Israel into the game. And now remember that there are you have Russian Jews, you have Jews in Germany, and you have Jews around the world who, each time issues of the Holocaust is mentioned, or anything that has to do with Hitler, it brings out all the sentiments in them. So I think that was a wrong statement. So Jewish-led countries or Jewish people who have been neutral about this game are now saying, after all, if we are drawn into the game, then be it. So what we're seeing is that everybody is trying to look at where best serves my position. Do I stay neutral or do I join the war? So it's important for us to understand that. And from what I'm looking at, that statement have to be withdrawn, or otherwise, countries that have been neutral might decide, especially where you have a lot of Jewish interests, are likely to, and it will be a long journey for Russia, and that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I know that this might not be a fair question to ask, and neither will it be, I don't know how people would see this, but, we had someone talk about, this war yesterday, and it was about the benefits, who's benefiting from this war. You have countries that are making arms to be sent to Ukraine. You have countries that are supplying, funding, for the purchase of military weapons. You have countries that are sending in, humanitarian provisions, for Ukraine, and there are countries that are also helping Ukrainians also settle. So who is benefiting from this war apart from Russia that intends to overtake and run over a legitimate government in Ukraine?
Everyone can benefit from it, Amarachi. Once talked about this book, this classical book I always mention, Games Nations Play. And remember the last time we spoke, I said, what can Africa benefit from this? 2 days ago, our Minister for State for Petroleum talked about Nigeria having $803 trillion worth of gas. And I'm asking, what are we doing? We should be talking to European Union to start investing in clean energy in Africa, in Nigeria. Not because South Africa is saying, no, we want to support Russia. Nigeria should be supporting the European Union to come and invest in Africa. Let it be what we are going to benefit from it. Everybody has something to benefit from. So I think that's what we should be benefiting from it. Everybody, those who are producing arms are going to benefit. So we should be benefiting something. Russia, because after this whole thing, there will be reconstruction. Most of the companies that will reconstruct Ukraine will be coming from the West. And about the last 2 or 3 days, Russia decided to cut off gas supply to Bulgaria and Romania. And the ministers of energy from the European Union will be meeting to decide on what next to do. So African countries that are producing gas should be sending delegates to the European Union now to say, come on, we are not your enemies. Come and invest in clean energy in Africa. So I think everybody has the opportunity of benefiting, and be strategic about it and be realistic about it and go for it.
Sad but true. Dr. Unduwokolo, thank you for speaking with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back after the break on the program, UEFA bans Russian national soccer teams and clubs from European competitions. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're coasting home now. Denmark has reopened its embassy in Ukraine. It opened it yesterday following its closure immediately after the Russian February 24 invasion of the country. According to the Foreign Ministry, the announcement comes as Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky welcomed the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Jeppe Kofod, to Kiev, where both sides held a meeting. The Foreign Minister said afterwards, it's a very strong symbol of the Danish support for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people that today we are reopening the doors to the Danish embassy embassy. Several other countries, including France, the United States and Britain, have recently announced that they're moving their embassies back to the Ukrainian capital. Speaking of which, the U.S. Embassy intends to reopen and return to Kiev by the end of May, if conditions permit, according to his chargé d'affaires. U.S. diplomats departed the Kiev Embassy nearly 2 weeks before Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine on February 24, moving some functions to the western city of Lviv before eventually relocating to neighboring Poland. Some Western countries have already moved their embassies back to Kiev as the main focus of the fighting in Ukraine has moved away from the capital to the east and the south of the country.
I would say the message to Russia is you failed. Ukraine is still standing, the government is still functioning, and we're going back to Lviv first and then Kyiv to help the government. We're doing it as a day trip. We expect to continue to do day trips for the next week or two. And then we very much hope that the conditions will permit us to go back into Kyiv by the end of the month.
In sports news, Uefa has banned Russia from the Women's European Championship in July and from participating in qualifying for next year's World Cup following the country's invasion of Ukraine. Portugal will replace Russia for the tournament in England, having lost to them in the qualifying playoffs, and will join the Netherlands, Sweden and Switzerland in Group C. Uefa also ruled Russia's bid to host the men's Euros in 2028 and 2032 ineligible. Additionally, Russian clubs will not compete in UEFA's Champions League, Europa League or Europa Conference Leagues next season. The statement says Russia will not participate in the Nations League, which begins in June, and will be automatically relegated from their second-tier group. Meanwhile, Ukraine's men's national football team are set to play their first fixture since the beginning of the war against German club side Borussia Mönchengladbach next week, Wednesday. The match is due to be held at Borussia Park, which can hold more than 54,000 spectators, with all proceeds donated towards relief efforts. Ukrainian citizens can receive free entry to the match. Our chief executive of the club, Stefan Schippers, called on supporters to attend the friendly game in large numbers. Our former world number 31, Sergei Stakhovsky, has taken to social media to oppose Nadal's claim on Wimbledon's decision to ban Russia and Belarusian athletes unfair. Nadal's comments on the ban did not go down well with the Kiev native, who slammed the Spaniard's view with a passionate rant on Twitter, in which he highlighted the gravity of the current situation in his home country. The ban will see the likes of Daniil Medvedev and Andrei Rublev deny the chance to play at Wimbledon. Nadal, who's claimed the top prize at Wimbledon in 2008 and 2010, is widely expected to play at the tournament as he looks to add to his total of 21 career Grand Slam titles with another triumph in London. A woman is painted a house in the colours of the Ukrainian flag to welcome her Ukrainian friend in the UK. Rand Platens secured a visa for Kristina Kornowick from Kiev under the Ukraine sponsorship scheme. The pair had been friends for 3 years and were reunited at Mrs. Platens' home in Cambridge yesterday. Mrs. Platens, who said she was really relieved that her friend had arrived, painted her house blue and yellow to make a statement about the Russian invasion. And State Emergency Services of Ukraine released a video showing the workers rescuing not a human being, but a fluffy cat from a damaged building in Borodyanka, a town northwest of the capital, Kiev. There it is. A cat was lowered down from a devastated building in the town where he was found and was given water to drink. even in the midst of the war, humanity shines through even for animals. Emergency services described on social media that this was a happy rescue, saying in a village where you can still smell death, a small miracle happened. Reports and footage from Borodyanka showed the town had suffered great destruction. It was one of the main hotspots of fighting between Ukraine and Russian forces. Now it's back under the Ukrainian flag as Russian forces withdrew in late March, pulling back from Ukraine's northern regions to intensify their offensive in the east. Wonder what's going on. It's a bar mitzvah. 4 orphans from the Ukrainian city of Zhytomyr celebrating their bar mitzvah, a Jewish coming-of-age ceremony usually held at the age of 13 at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. This happened on Monday. Accompanied by members of the Jewish organization Chabad, 13-year-old boys were welcomed into the Western Wall Plaza with live music, singing and dancing. They later prayed alongside their Israeli peers at the ancient wall and placed their prayer notes into its cracks. Chabad organized the bar mitzvah for orphans. The organization cares for those orphans, part of a larger group whose ages range between 2 and 12, arrived in Israel on March 3rd from war-torn Ukraine after a journey through Romania.
I feel great here. There are a lot of Jewish people, Jewish community. They are so helpful. I'm excited. I can't express my feelings just with the words because this is a huge celebration and I loved it.
Part of it is beyond special. We make this event once a year for orphans. We're with the orphans consistently 365 days a year, guiding them, helping them to go through the traumatic experiences that they've gone through. Of course, right now, with the Ukrainian crisis, with the Ukrainian refugees, many of us who are parents and grandparents were refugees themselves, when we hear the word refugees, we wake up, we jump up. So to be able to welcome refugees and to be part of them and to bring them into your events, into your curriculums is something that's truly beyond.
That's the program today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Rubani.